Some of you might have noticed a couple of days ago, if you were maybe interested in Gran Turismo, that a new little trailer dropped, and it had a little bit of fanfare, I guess, and of course here on the channel, I did a breakdown of 35 things within that video that you might have missed. I also called for you guys to point out things in the comments that you think I also missed from that trailer, and there were quite a few. Now some of these things I didn't miss, I just deliberately didn't talk about because we already knew them. So I'm going to try and avoid those for the most part, and these are things which I genuinely missed. A couple of things though are here for clarification purposes, and we'll talk about them when we get to them. Now, by far the most common thing that I saw in the comments and in DMs was that I missed putting decals or stickers on the windows of cars now, which is new to the series. Well, kind of new to the series. You could do the driver's name on the body here and there, you could do window banners, so it's not entirely new, but it appears that this is going more in depth than GT Sport had, for sure. So that was a good call, and I did overlook that one. I was looking more at the other parts of the screen, so absolutely great shot for all of those of you who pointed that out. Number 2 is a Mitsubishi Evo that I just saw and completely blanked on because I thought we already had it in GT Sport. There are so many JDM cars that got added at weird times in that game that it's sometimes hard to keep track of which ones we did and didn't have. Some people were saying that they thought it was an Evo 6 Tommy Mäkinen edition. It is actually not. It's an Evo 5. And the reason why you can tell is twofold. One, it has the license plate in the centre of the car, not offset, and more importantly, it has those big old spotlights in the bumper, which the Mark 6, the Evo 6 in other words, does not have. So that is in fact a Mitsubishi Evo 5, and that is indeed a returning car that was not in GT Sport. Next up, keeping it on the topic of new vehicles, this one is not shown per se in the trailer, but it is at the same time. We don't see it driving, we don't see it in a garage, but we see it very briefly in a photo. And the crazy thing is, I actually looked at these photos when I was skimming through the trailer myself, and somehow missed this one, but it's the classic Mercedes W194 SL, the 300 SL, in effect race car, in other words. Now doubtless this is going to be a high roller, in other words, one of the really expensive cars in the game. But again, it's always nice to have more classic and vintage stuff, especially within the racing world. And I do appreciate that Gran Turismo doesn't leave those cars behind. Another one which we saw, and this one was called out a few times as well, and I'm actually happy to see this one back, especially to see what kind of body modifications it can have as well. The Silvia, the S15 Silvia. Now this one is blink and you'll miss it in the trailer, and I guess I blinked because I did miss it myself. We already had the S13 of course in GT Sport, but this one is a returning face, which was not in the past game. Another car which I noticed myself, but not until after making the video, because technically this wasn't, unless I totally missed it, in the trailer at all. This was actually a screen grab from part of the used car dealership section, and that is the Scirocco. Not a hugely important car for many people, but the Volkswagen Scirocco R was of course in GT6, it was also a premium at the time, but then it skipped GT Sport. Never featured in that game, and now it's coming back. The next one is another new vehicle, and this is one which I'm annoyed that I missed, the Ford GT GTE race car, the 2018 shape full-on racing version of the Ford GT. Of course, we saw the road-going Ford GT of the new V6 engine shape added to the game. One of my favourite additions, in fact, within GT Sport. It was long overdue, and having this one in there now as well, of course it's appropriate because not only is it updating the GT, but it's also, in a nice kind of callback sense, keeping that through line from even the Gran Turismo 4 days of having a Ford GT race car featured in the game. And for those who don't know, Kaz loves the Ford GT, which is one of the reasons why it was the hero car of GT4. Next up we have a note on circuits, and this is that there are going to be, at the time of release, and that is a crucial point here, more circuits, and that includes variations of circuits, in GT7 than there are in GT Sport. GT Sport has 83 variations. GT7 at release is due to have over 90. That is a significant improvement because although 7 more doesn't sound like that much, that's comparing the end of GT Sport's life after adding multiple circuits to the beginning of GT7's life. So chances are we'll get DLC or updates that add more later on, and if that does happen, it will end up with even more than that. So that is a very, very good sign, and we've even seen some of those, including the next point, which is Daytona. Now, I think I might have discussed Daytona being in the game before, but I don't recall whether or not I did. So if you want to go back and check the other GT7 videos that I did, by all means, but if I didn't mention it before, I am at least mentioning it here. Daytona is in GT7, so that is another returning face, and of course, that will be part of those 90 circuits. This next one was one of the most commonly said to me in the comments of that video, alongside the window decals. This is the one in particular that I was thinking of when I deliberately didn't mention it though, and that is dynamic weather and time of day changes. I deliberately didn't talk about that because we already knew that. That was already in the first trailer. We saw the time of day changing, and considering that GT Sport has changing weather, we more or less assumed, well, of course it's going to be in GT7. Maybe not on every circuit, but at least on some, which is the way it's done in GT Sport as well. So I didn't mention that because I assumed that most of us already knew that. Apparently not. There seem to be quite a few people who maybe missed that. So for those who did miss it, or maybe didn't know up until this point, yes, we do have dynamic weather and dynamic times. Next up was another good call, which is that we appear, as well as the decals and the livery editor, that we can also edit, to some degree at least, the license plates of cars, or the number plates, as we call them here in the UK. It's only a smaller thing, but again, just adds to that level of personalisation which you can have, and for me, makes me think back to games on the PS2 era, like Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition, which in some ways was way ahead of its time, such as doing your own license plates. Next up is another one which I didn't miss in the trailer, and you certainly didn't either, but more so I want to bring this up because of what this actually infers about GT7's experience, so bear with me here. We saw the GT Auto section. Now, we noticed that, as I said, you kind of missed it really if you saw the trailer, but what that actually means is very significant, because that includes stuff like car washes, body rigidity improvements and restorations, and of course the classic oil change. And personally, on a side note, I hope that the oil change gives you a little bit more power, as it always used to, even on a brand new car. But that's kind of my point. That, alongside the used car dealerships, shows that Gran Turismo 7 is, in a much more tangible way than GT Sport ever tried to, having cars wear over time. Cars that do change and lose power and lose some body rigidity over tens or hundreds of thousands of miles. Or in the case of a race car, a couple of hundred laps, because of how hard they're being driven. That, I think, is a great sign, because it means it's just that extra layer of old school Gran Turismo. So even though it's an obvious thing in the trailer, it may have overlooked some people's minds just what that actually means. So I wanted to bring that up, because to me that's pretty cool and it's pretty important. And the final thing is for those photographers out there. And of course, I do a ton of photography within the game for the thumbnails of videos in GT Sport, and I will in GT7 as well, but just how enlarged the scapes are may have been overlooked by some people, because we've gone from having about 1,200 scapes locations in GT Sport, which is pretty massive, to over 2,500 in GT7. And again, that's at release, so it could well get even bigger later, pending updates and DLC. Now, on the point of that, just before I end this video, I'd love to hear what you guys think about how that's going to work in GT7, because in GT Sport, the game really relied and benefited immensely from those updates. It literally changed the fundamental structure of the entire game, from career mode to circuits to cars to weather. It made it a totally different game. Do you think, and here's the question to discuss in the comments, do you think GT7 is going to have as many updates, or maybe in the form of DLC instead, as GT Sport has? Or do you think because it has so many more things implemented from day one, it's going to dial that back? Now, to me, I think the latter. I believe that most of it is going to be aimed to be in the game at launch, and I believe that if anything, apart from maybe some updates when it comes to sport mode or balance of performance or FIA related stuff, which will probably be what gets the most updates, I believe we might get some new vehicles and new tracks, but probably in the form of DLC rather than updates. And to be honest, if the game itself is already bigger and better, which it certainly seems to be from day one, then I have no issue with buying DLC, especially if the packs are big and substantial and have good stuff. So that's the question to discuss. And of course, if you think there's still other things which I missed, well, chances are if I didn't mention them, it's because we already knew. But you can put it down in the comments anyway. Overall then, that's it for this update. Of course, check out that other video if you haven't already. And it goes without saying, stick around on the channel with notifications, ideally, because of how rubbish YouTube is at showing people videos, to see more GT7 content. And there is going to be a lot more GT7 content on the channel, as well as a ton of other automotive stuff in the real world as well, where I actually drive a lot of the cars that we have in Gran Turismo in real life. So stick around for that as well, and until next time, I'll see you then. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.